As a are particularly severe in the eastern part of country and Kakheti as well as the region. Experiencing the pressure from other including anthropology substantially. For example, it's common to set manner. Fires, vineyards, and the study conducted in the Doprisaro in 2016, which in the or arable land are bare in Shiraki Valley. It is demonstrated windbreak would be lost within the last 10 years the current rates of fires. To address the project Restoring Ecosystem to Reduce Drought Risk and Increase Resilience kicked off in Georgia in October. The aim is to provide solutions that both improve ecosystem and importance of the communities to nature. This its stakeholders in Georgia drought and they inform about pond and implementation of this project will contribute from EU agreement to the more. And the concept of nature-based and its approaches is most known by the park project in Georgia. However, strategies, the regional forest concept includes this with region and nature-based solution drought. The COP organizations and prepare this very important document. So thank you very much.
Présentation, je vais donner la situation en matière de sécheresse.
Thank you very much, and good morning, distinguished participants. The discussion we have this morning is a discussion that resonates very well with similar discussions in the country. That point the need for us to scale up investments in our ridgelands, grasslands, and savannas. If we have with I'm from a country that is 85% ridgelands, grasslands, and savanna. It's only 15% that we commonly refer to as high agricultural potential areas. But nevertheless, the 85% of our ridgelands, grasslands, and savannas are extremely important for our survival. As a they contribute immensely to socio-economic development by sustaining the livelihoods of communities and also support our national economy in terms of tourism. More than percent of Kenya's population lives in these areas. And now a lot of livestock are also resident there, which account for 30% of country's GDP. And 90% of our wildlife are also found in the regular savannas and grasslands. And we also say that is very, very heavily dependent on tourism revenue. And a tourism industry that is heavily dependent on our wildlife. Out of the 47 county governments in the country, 24 of them have within them regulars, grasslands, and savannas. So you can see the importance of these areas and the need for us to invest more in them, economic development of our country, to support the livelihoods of the communities that reside therein. We also fully appreciate that these areas are facing unprecedented challenges with regard to degradation and loss of important ecological resources and economic opportunities. This problem, when compounded with and increased and more frequent drought incidences, they have continued to impact very strongly and negatively on the communities that reside therein. And again, to share with you some brief statistics. We are now reporting about 30% of our roads across the country and undergoing some degradation. We have already started witnessing a decreased number of livestock in the country. Not just of livestock. We have seen some changes in the livestock number, the livestock themselves, the types of livestock. The cattle are decreasing, but we have seen an increased number of sheep and camels. Wildlife numbers have decreased significantly over the last 4 decades. But we also find ourselves in a situation where about 60% of our communities in these areas live below the poverty line. So as a government, recognize the need for us to scale up investment in these areas. And we have always, as a country, invested in social and economic development that seeks to further strengthen the resilience. And our intention is to increase of these ecosystems by reducing degradation and further restoring those landscapes. And be witnessed through a number of policy developments that have come up in a few years, and in investment, direct investments through capital injection from the government. We have a long-term national development vision that drives investment across the country and has already a strong focus for these areas. We have a drought risk management strategy that seeks to add drought emergencies, We have the institutions that have been established by the government to support this effort. And these institutions are driven strongly through a multi-sector engagement. We realize that we need to have coordination and investment to drive actions. We are talking about landscape restoration. In that context, we have issues of forestry, we have wildlife, we have agriculture, and others that require to be consulted periodically and to provide solutions for actions moving forward. We already have management strategy that seeks to provide an opportunity for holistic development of these areas through interventions that seeks to improve livestock management systems and wildlife, incorporate what we are talking about here. The need for us to invest in land restoration systems that incorporate issues of climate, biodiversity conservation, land restoration. As a country, we believe that the legislators will continue to play a significant role in driving actions forward. But we also realize that the within the country may not deliver what we are looking for in the long term. We need to scale up investments. We need to scale up finance. And an opportunity then comes in for all of us to play our rightful role. We seek to deliver, yes, national policy goals, but we also seek to align ourselves with global policies and the need for us to team up and scale up, especially finance, to support our national efforts. Thank you very much.
Du Kenya, de présenter la situation de la sécheresse au Burkina.
Merci beaucoup. Vraiment, pour le Burkina, nous nous réjouissons de nous retrouver ici avec vraiment tout ce qui est fait par l'IUCN et la coopération pour nous permettre de partager l'expérience au Burkina. Il faut se dire que la sécheresse est la première catastrophe naturelle que nous subissons. Et à l'heure actuelle, nous assistons à carrément une descente des isolés, vraiment de la partie nord où le Sahel devient presque comme la savane qui est plus ou moins sahélisée et à l'heure actuelle là qui devient plus ou moins et surtout avec des ordres récurrentes dont les plus sévères ont été enregistrés en 1973, 1984, 1991, 1994, 1998 et 2004. Mais c'est surtout les épisodes de 70-73 qui sont considérés parmi les plus sévères ayant conduit à une prise de conscience sous-régionale par le chef d'État qui a vu l'action de l'organisme sous-régional qui est en 1930. Et pour cela, pour faire face à cela, nous disposons d'un cadre vraiment de gestion de la sécheresse. D'abord, un système de suivi de la sécheresse et d'alerte précoce qui est géré par la Direction générale de la météorologie en collaboration avec le Centre africain pour les applications de la météorologie au développement ACMA. Nous avons également évalué notre vulnérabilité et cela a conduit à identifier 4 secteurs vraiment vulnérables dont le secteur de l'agriculture, les ressources en eau, les ressources animales, la foresterie. Et également des groupes vulnérables ont été identifiés qui en fait se regroupent parmi les populations rurales, notamment les femmes, les jeunes et les petits exploitants agricoles. Nous disposons également d'un secours d'urgence et de réponse à la sécheresse qui est géré par une structure appelée le CONASUR, Conseil national de secours d'urgence de réhabilitation, qui inclut à son les principaux services tant au niveau central qu'au niveau décentralisé avec les organisations sécheresse-là. Et parmi ces bonnes pratiques, on peut en citer celles relatives à l'agriculture, avec toutes les méthodes que vous connaissez, des design, des 2000, etc., pour la rétention de l'eau pour une production plus accrue. Des aménagements également physiques des terres, également agricoles, des pratiques biologiques telles que les composts et autres intrants biologiques, des pratiques géotechniques au titre desquelles les forces de conservation des fourrages et bien sûr tout cela là parfois est combiné pour davantage optimiser vraiment au titre des éléments de perspective. Et on remarque que quand il y a la sécheresse, il y a vraiment les humanitaires qui beaucoup plus. Et en même temps, vraiment, les secteurs de production aussi sont là. Donc, il y a une nécessité à ce qu'il y ait en même temps qu'on a bon humanitaire et avec vraiment là pour que les victimes de la sécheresse là sont mieux. Également, il nous faut vraiment faire davantage mettre l'accent sur la sensibilisation pour une prise de conscience plus accrue quant surtout à la pertinence et supériorité des solutions de nature. Et c'est de façon ramassée vraiment l'expérience du Burkina en matière de sécheresse qui nous a amené à faire la suggestion, à mettre en place un cadre et à envisager des perspectives à l'heure actuelle. Je vous remercie.
Merci, M. Lana. Merci encore aux trois présentateurs. Je veux demander de les applaudir pendant que les gens les placent. Et on va regarder en 5 minutes une vidéo qui vient de l'Afrique du Sud.
The UCD is expensive and cost accessible to all.
The evidence has shown that the best way actually to address this is to spend the scarce resources that the region has and actually be more prepared for the droughts in the first place. So this includes things like investing in drought monitoring and early warning systems, being able to have programs that can assess the impacts of the droughts when they occur, and having social safety programs in place to help protect the poorest and the more vulnerable. And then other drought risk mitigation measures like having risk financing mechanisms, contingency planning across different scales of decision making, and other things like doing longer term investment planning with consideration of climate change.
It's important for the countries to have innovative policies and institutions and technologies to manage the impacts of the drought. I think we have short-term measures and also long-term measures. And in terms of short-term measures, they will include building water reservoirs, hard dams to harvest rainwaters, and the rehabilitation of water catchments in these regions. We can also think of changing farmers' penalties and shifting to a drought-tolerant crops because given the situation, it's important to see what are the crops that are most adaptable to the drought seasons. So this could be important short-term measures that would help to tackle the impact of the drought in the communities. Then as in terms of the long-term, so we have specifically two measures there. For long-term perspective, it will be important to develop water infrastructures such as permanent dams and ways, which will help to tackle the issues. And secondly, to protect land and forest cover through soil restoration and by planting trees and cover crops.
IUCN comes into play because it's one of the key implementing partner with SADC, and in this community we are working with them as part of the secretariat, whereby there's several projects that we're working with them and implementing in the region. This project includes the SADC Trans-Frontier Conservation Area Financing Facility, where we are providing grants for trans-frontier conservation areas in the region, and we are facilitating this particular project on behalf of SADC. We do have other projects, for example, the Transport Water Initiatives, which is Kubusa, looking at the dry river basin of Pongwe, Busi, and Save, where we're building a roadmap which involves drafting international, institutional, and posting agreements for Kubusa. The third project is this initiative where we're involved with the SADC in terms of drafting and developing the drought strategy, which talks to not only the region but also the deliverables, particularly on how we can be able to mitigate and adapt against climate change and also enhance drought resilience.
The strategy points out on the first point to build and enhance the resilience of vulnerable communities and ecosystems to the effects of recurrent droughts, while is targeting simultaneous growth and sustainable development in the SADC region. And second, for more investments in drought resilience and adoption methodologies. The strategy also recognizes the importance of the UNCCD toolbox, and the next step is to assist the SADC Secretariat with resource mobilization. And IUCN is going to work with partners including FAO, World Bank, IMI, and others in order to make sure that the strategy is implemented.
Voilà, la première séquence de cette session prend fin avec cette vidéo. Et je vais demander, mesdames et messieurs, peut-être vos questions, vos commentaires pour la session de discussion. Je vais maintenant appeler M. Chris, chargé de programme senior IUCN, et Dr. Ting, chercheur à IASA, pour s'installer à la table. Et Monsieur Chris, vous avez 7 minutes pour nous parler des solutions fondées sur la nature et la sécheresse. Et Madame King, vous avez 10 minutes pour nous parler du rôle des solutions fondées sur la nature pour réduire la sécheresse. Et je crois qu'après ces deux présentations, nous aurons 5 minutes de questions-réponses avant de passer à la troisième séquence. Monsieur Chris, vous avez la parole.
Thank you so much. Participants, nice to be here. Just a way of introduction. I work with IUCN. IUCN works in more than it's a partnership organization, more than 500 members. Just to give a brief of that, we have government as part of our membership. We also have indigenous people groups as well as NGOs, CSOs as part of that. So we are in many countries around the world. And I would like to, really come back to this aspect of drought. And we have been talking about it. One of the things that I'd like to point out, that when we talk about drought, land degradation is part and parcel of it. Every time you hear about drought, you'll hear about some degraded land, you'll hear about water resources. We're going to dive a bit deep into that. There's one aspect of drought then that becomes not very prominent when we talk about not mitigating but addressing the aspect of drought. There's a human forcing when we talk about drought. And when humans utilize ecosystems in a not very sustainable way, it actually starts the processes that are related to drought. There is strong evidence already about drought. So when we look at the statistics around the world, about 620 droughts have been recorded, and those are the ones that have been recorded and have occurred since the 1900s to the 2013. Its economic impact, we all know, and I think it's at the national level, we also see it at regional level and at a global scale. But some of the damning statistics are, the number of people who actually died because of drought. For this period of time, we're talking about 12 million deaths. I was just calculating that, I think it's about 1 million on average a year. This is just damning statistics when you talk about this. And that doesn't include those who are already also affected by drought. Drought in itself, in the definition, is a slow onset process. That's by definition. We say it starts slowly. We also point out that it's climate related. So when we talk about temperature, when we talk about rainfall, when those variations occur, then we start talking about drought. But the reality of drought is that it is complex. It's slow onset, we know when it has happened, but it is complex in terms of when we actually decide it has happened and it has not. And I think this is the one thing that we bring when we talk about nature-based solutions. So, next slide. I will not go into a lot of detail about the nature-based solutions, but there are key things that I'd like to point out about it. Now, when you're talking about it, you're talking about sustainably managing, protecting, putting in place structures, whether it is real infrastructure or built infrastructure, that can actually help you manage societal challenges. And the outcome of it, what we are looking for, is not one-fold, but we're looking for human social development in that, but also biodiversity net gain. So this is the key thing that I'd like to point out when we talk about nature-based solutions. It is solutions that provide a change to the societal challenges we face, but do not compromise the resources that we need for the future generations. I think this is very paramount to it. There are a number of principles that we talk about when we talk about nature-based solutions for drought, I'm not going into the details, but it is something that we can refer to. For drought, it is important that we address the societal challenges, which is the drought itself, but also look at other principles that can help us design it so that it fits in with principles that can allow for biodiversity net gains as well. So the next slide. Again, we have talked about the planetary boundaries report, and if we look back in 2016 when it was published, we already knew that water is one of the resources that's already in an unsure state when you talk about planetary boundary resources. A recent publication that came out this year has actually pointed that in this water resources, there's actually green water that was separated. And green water looks at three things. It looks at the precipitation, so rainfall effectiveness when it happens. It looks at evapotranspiration, so how much pressure is going out of the system in terms of that. But it also looks at a third aspect that does with availability. Okay. I thought it was very loud. Oh, now it's very loud. So it also looks at the third aspect of how the rainfall is effective in the soil. There are many studies, but one study in Amboseli that has been carried out over 25 years has actually shown that over time, with not much deviation in the rainfall, there has been much less productivity in the landscape. And this has been attributed to a couple of things. One is the vegetation cover and whatever they call the rainfall effectiveness, how much the rainfall is effective to enable primary production. So it is one of the things that we need to continually consider, this aspect of green water and the planetary boundaries. Next slide. So when you talk about drought, and it occurs a lot, again, in rangelands, it occurs a lot in drylands, but even in farm systems. One of the key things we talk about is grasses, for example, and how they work in that ecosystem. And the picture you see here is actually one that's pointing out the phenology of grasses, how grasses grow. In some cases, grasses grow for a very short period of time. But one of the key things is that they have a very huge rooted biomass that lives underneath. The second picture shows that it is not only grasses that are important, it's the shrubs, the forbs, the grasses that makes the ecosystem vibrant. When management and human systems move beyond such a boundary, then we lose the rooting system, we lose the life that is underneath the ground. And that directly affects the amount of green water that is available, the amount of water that can be absorbed into the system, the amount of water that percolates and gets to the storage underneath. We're going to look a bit more at this, and I will ask my colleague at this point, if we go to the next slide. There are a few things that we already need to start thinking about. And one of them is, I say redefining, but I don't think it's redefining, it's probably refining drought, but changing the way we think about it. Nature-based solutions for drought is one of the key approaches that provides a holistic approach. It doesn't just say, let's address drought and what's happening today, but let's look at how we can even stop and reduce drought in some cases. And this has to be absorbed into the drought frameworks, how we plan, how we manage drought. So I will leave it at this, and we'll hand it over to my colleague, who will tell us a bit more about what this actually means in the process.
Yes, thanks, Chris. So I am
from the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. So with Greece and the respondent from the Austrian Development Agency, we have been working on a project where we are really looking what are the relationships between land processes and drought. So with this talk, I want to just really go to the basics, go to the roots of how this process takes place and what are the mechanisms behind nature-based solution and drought stability and incidences. So I want to start with some very basic questions. What are the types of drought we're talking about? Most of the time in the past weeks here at home, I heard people talking about crop failure, crop production, food security. So this basically relates to the needs that you say here, some dying plants, and soil casting, then you can't plant anything and there's low food or reduced food yields from there. So that basically relates to what we call a soil moisture drought. So there's a reduction of soil water content in the dry situation. And depending on the ecosystem you are looking at, it might be called agricultural drought or ecological drought. Just to expand from this idea, I think most of you would know that before there's a soil moisture drought, there will be the meteorological drought. So that's where the precipitation decreases. Chris just mentioned that because even without the meteorological drought, so without the precipitation decrease, you might also have a soil moisture drought. So these are the anthropogenic or human factors taking place. And with soil moisture drought, and there are also the hydrological drought. So that's with the blue waters, the water in the river system, in the lake system, the groundwater system that's reducing. And on top of all this, there's the economic process. Our colleagues earlier was talking about the loss of life, loss of economic assets, and also this are linked to, for example, loss of industrial production that requires water input. In the traditional definition of drought, they are saying, okay, that's because of the natural climate variability. You have the variability where there's drought, like very dry periods. But I think we all would agree that the human factor these days comes very much into play in making the the traditional natural hazard a lot more severe and with more incidences. And this is where I want to come in and really emphasize that when we look at drought reduction policies or drought risk reduction, it's not only the downstream part that's making that can work. The downstream part, I mean, like drought, like reducing the impact by adapting to this system, but also on the upstream side, by reducing the occurrence of drought itself, or by reducing the severity of drought itself. And those are where the nature-based solutions can come into play and then really change the basically the water quantity parts before the drought takes place. So on the mechanism side, first we want to look at how the land process are linked to drought. So when we talk about land degradation or land restoration, we refer to mainly three components. As a vegetation cover change, degradation would be vegetation loss. Restoration most times refer to increase of a vegetation cover, but this also depends on obviously restoration actions. The second component is the soil erosion in terms of land degradation. And third one is to the soil properties. We have sessions on soil health. People were talking about soil fertility or not in the past days. And all this can be linked to the hydrological process. The first one is, so we classify it into three very much interlinked pathways. The first one is changing of soil quantity and soil property. This will change what we call the soil hydraulic properties. So how water is stored or transported into the water system, into the soil profile. And the second one would be the modifying, due to the modifying of our surface and soil processes, its part of it. And lastly, through the climate change. With vegetation loss, we know that there's, I think this is very starting in the climate science side, especially with deforestation. There is an increase of carbon dioxide emission into the atmosphere. There's increase of wind erosion that increase the dust emission into the atmosphere, both contributing to climate dynamics. So a bit more on the soil property side, you don't have to look at the slides. It's a bit too much. In general, we talk about the physical changes, the chemical changes, and about biological changes in the soil system, and that acts on the three hydraulic properties of the soil system. The first one, the infiltration capacity, so when there's a rainfall, how much water can actually go to the soil profile. The second one is the hydraulic connectivity, so that's basically the parameter that, or the property that governs how water moves in the soil profile. And lastly, the soil storage capacity. So that's how much the water can be stored into the soil system. So I want to give the first example on the soil compaction. So we can perhaps know that soil compaction comes from missionary agriculture, also livestock farming in grassland and rangelands. And with the compact soil, the most obvious things will be the reduction of soil porosity. So that's the number of pores or the volume of pores that water can go in, reduce it, and this reduce the hydraulic connectivity and the water storage capacity of the soil, and it's also reduce the root growth in the soil profile. And that's also reduce groundwater recharge, and all this can act on the soil moisture drought, the groundwater molecules on vegetation cover, impacts on drought. I just already mentioned through many two pathways. One is through the hydrological one, that's the blue boxes you see there. Another one is through the atmospheric change and climate side. That's the green and green box up there. I won't go into too much details, but just on the vegetation cover side, I think we all know that when you clean up a forest, for example, or clean your grasslands, there will be increase of runoff. And this runoff goes to a river system, and that goes downstream. However, that would reduce the soil moisture on site. So you might have an increase of discharge into the river system, which you might think, okay, this is perfect because we have a reduction of drought, hydrologic drought. But then you have an increase of the soil moisture drought. That is why it's important to consider both, consider the difference between droughts and put them in the same picture. And the last example I will give is on the deforestation and reforestation impact on climate. I already mentioned this carbon dioxide emission and dust emission on the atmospheric process. Here is some evidence of that. In general, deforestation generally creates a warmer climate and generally tends to give a drier climate. The warmer part is much certain, and there's a lot of agreements in the science community, but the drier part is very dynamic. It really depends on where you are looking at. And here is an example. I will just give one example in Central Africa. So this is a scenario if there's complete deforestation of Central Africa, and then you will have a mixed response of rainfall increase and decrease in Southern Africa, but then you will have the response also extends to the northern hemisphere in the temperate one, with a decrease of rainfall in almost all the continents. With that, I want to conclude with a few key messages. First of all, the land degradation and land restoration, the impacts droughts, and that's including drought severity and drought incidences, mostly working on the drought severity. And this can take place through the whole system, like through soil, through the hydrologic process and land surface process, as well as through atmospheric processes. With NBS, there is a possibility that we address land degradation from the start and to do preventive land restoration and preventive measures for drought reduction. And with that, to increase drought mentioned that Georgia has quite a complex relief and climatic zone system, and therefore it sets a scene for a very particular drought situation in the country. So in Georgia, there are almost all climate types, except savannas and tropical climates. And what is even more interesting is that those climatic zones are situated sometimes very nearby, like 70-80 kilometers apart from each other. And there is also Little mountain range that divides the country into two zones, and it defines the different characteristics of the different parts of the country. So while western part of the country enjoys quite a lot of precipitation, eastern part is drought-prone in general by its climatic characteristics, and the temperature generally depends on the relief. So as you can see, the temperature distribution on the map does not depend on the eastern or western part, while actually precipitation does depend. I also would like to mention that while more than 70% of water resources are concentrated in the western part, 72% of population in the eastern part, 85% of irrigation agriculture is in the eastern part of Georgia. Therefore, this part is quite dependent on the water. Here you can see just the distribution of the drought. As I mentioned, the eastern part is much more drought-prone, and it's both for the maximum drought intensity and the probability of the appearance of a severe drought. And again, as Nino mentioned previously, the droughts were not so often in the region. They were once every 15-20 years, but recently the frequency of this event really has almost tripled, and they started to affect much more of the population. And here you can see the years of drought. So from 1976, starting to really accelerate. And here, of course, the natural factor plays a big role, but also the climate change that amplifies these effects. However, I just want to, yes, and this is also the damage that is causing, which is huge. So, when we were talking at the country context, we found out that drought is not directly associated with land degradation, and the country generally addresses the effects of drought, but not the prevention so much. So the country is addressing the fires, the loss of agriculture productivity, but not so much is done in terms of prevention. And we were trying to find out what is the main causes of the degradation in the country. Also, we already mentioned that there 2002. Here we have an example of what it looked like for one of the rivers. So Bani River was just 30% of its norm, and it affected, of course, the hydropower production as well, as you can imagine. So, but also because the drinking water was prioritized, there was lack of water for irrigation as well. So it affected also agriculture. Well, and in the regions, in the districts that are mentioned here, I don't want to read them all. So that was almost the whole part of eastern Georgia was an area of disaster because it was so severe. Yeah. Of course, after the onset of meteorological drought and the soil moisture was decreased, there was agricultural drought. So agricultural production dropped significantly for both rainfed and irrigated areas, and Georgia faced food crisis. You can see that the loss of GDP was 5.6% for the country, and 25% of agricultural activity was lost. It was affecting all sectors of the economy and, of course, the rural population. And it affected a lot the health of women as well because there was some malnutrition and mothers were sparing the food for the children. And there was also the problem of migration, however, that was relieved and it was mostly successful. And as I mentioned before, the hydroelectric production was also decreased, so the power had to be rationed in the capital city. And here I just want to mention the response that was before when this drought occurred. So almost 700,000 people required external food aid because agricultural production failed. And 26 tons of seeds were needed as well for planting again because of agricultural production. So eventually the large amount of food aid was distributed and nearly 700,000 people was after all severely affected by the drought, but they got help. We have collected also some anecdotal evidence, some opinions from local population on the ground in the most affected regions. So you can just see here that there is the Gumisi Reservoir that is actually fed from Guani River that had decreased flow during the drought, and it caused quite a serious ecological problem and sanitary problem as well because the fish was dead and there was an outbreak of algae growing in the water. And locals cannot understand, of course, local population that perhaps the human unsustainable practices, the fact that they were taking a lot of water for irrigation also caused this type of disaster. And here, just an opinion about the practice of burning the land plots. Most of the people think that this is unsustainable, but again, there is lack of understanding by local communities about the connection of the practice and the fact that this practice is making the effects of drought much more severe for them. Okay, this is just about it from the country example. I just want to mention quickly about the work that we are doing. So that was part of the research. It was not the full, of course, the research. We also have the policy review that is ongoing currently to understand how we can address actually the drought through improvement of the governance and management practices in the country. We will have the workshop to validate and endorse these policy recommendations, and we will have also the training on how to incorporate nature-based solution in the policy, so that it could address the root of occurrence of the drought. And after we will conduct as well the community dialogues
escamoter un peu l'agenda. Donc on va donner 5 minutes aux participants pour intervenir le temps qu'on mette en place la dernière séquence. 5 minutes de questions sur les dernières présentations, les présentations précédentes. Est-ce que quelqu'un veut intervenir? Pendant ce temps, je demande aux autres de rejoindre les places et donner le nom de la personne à qui vous adressez la question.
Good morning. I'm Ahmed from Oman. I'm interested in the nature-based solutions regarding drought, especially with the existing of livestock. A friend from Nigeria, he talked about livestock nature-based management. And I'm wondering what kind of practice or best practices put on air, on floor, and exercise get best results. If you give an example, and this is actually related to the overgrazing problems the speaker from Georgia talked about. So if you elaborate on this issue, please. Thank you.
So any other person want to talk? Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Christine Kipsa from Kenya. My question goes to the presenter from IUCN, the gentleman. Sorry, I didn't get his name. Is it that drought has affected people to the extent of death, 12 million, and we, especially myself, I got alarmed. So if 12 million have died, I'm sure we do not want to lose another life. So what urgent measure is being taken, especially those people who are severely affected by this drought in these particular areas that millions are dying? And then the second question relates, okay, it's a comment. The second question is the issue of how this information we are getting here, which is very relevant, how it can be harnessed and put in form of small videos or scripts that can be disseminated by the youth in the social media platforms, and even in the village where we usually have those village cinemas and videos that can really help the farmers get the information about change. Because as we all know, it's very hard to change people, especially those who are used to growing like the maize I've seen there. They keep on growing maize year in, year out, whether there's drought or there's no drought, and they are not understanding that they can grow like grass, or they can grow like cover crops that can really fix the soil and maintain soil fertility. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. La dernière personne avant qu'on ne revienne, parce qu'il y aura une autre session de questions.
Merci bien. Moi, c'est l'incident du Burkina Faso. Ma question s'adresse à M. Nana, qui a fait une très belle présentation. Je voulais en fait savoir s'il y a une corrélation entre sécheresse et pluie périodique.
We have another session for question. Don't worry for that. So keep your question. For the two questions, I asked Georgia, Chris, and Nana to provide the answer. Quickly, 1 second per person.
Okay. I think I will probably speak to two questions. The first one being what are the nature-based solutions for that? I think I'm understood. What is a practical thing to do? In drylands, as you know, where livestock production is important, one of the key important aspects is also governance of land in those lands. So within drylands, we work in a very complex environment where tenure matters, institutions, especially traditional institutions matter, as well as the governance, how people work to manage the land. One example I can give you, which we have been worked for a couple of years in Jordan with our project in IUCN, is we have worked with the local communities to reinstitute their governance systems, which has allowed them to, first of all, secure their tenure, but also set aside land that can be used especially for livestock in dry seasons. So they have been able to balance the land. It's a rotational system, if you look at it in a modern vocabulary, but for them, it is just in their governments, places that they keep separate for other systems. By recognizing that system, they have been able to respond quite positively to, advanced approaches. So that is one of the ones that we respond to.
I just want to add to what Chris said about the sustainable pasture management. Well, basically, the reason why we would like to conduct a community dialogue is because we would like to find out what are the sustainable practices that are more suitable for the local conditions, because they may vary from country to country, and understanding that people may do as well. And therefore, I think that's important to take into account. I think this is also something that needs to be mentioned.
Merci beaucoup. Et je n'ai pas l'information scientifique qui établit vraiment les deux phénomènes, mais ce que je sais, l'éclosion vraiment des criquets pèlerins un rapport étroit avec la météorologie, donc nécessairement il y a en tout cas une certaine corrélation, une certaine influence de la sécheresse là-dessus. Merci beaucoup.
Ok, merci. Donc, il y aura une autre session de questions-réponses. En ce moment, on passe à la dernière séquence et je vais passer la main à Chris qui va modérer les dernières séquences. Voilà.
Okay. Thank you so much for your participation so far. Some of the key things that I'm already picking from the conversations that we're having today. For example, in Georgia, drought is not a traditional phenomenon, but it's coming. We can see from the statistics. Once in 10 to 15 years, now or 1 to 5. Most of the countries which are already affected by drought are going every 3 to 5 years cycles of drought. That is something that we need to think about. Secondly, there is the aspect around no single solution. With NBS is quite central. There's no one solution. If you see your rivers running downstream, it doesn't mean that everything is okay upstream. So we have to already think about the sectors. Who do we work with in the landscape? Who's working upstream? What are they doing? What does this increase in volume of water mean downstream? What does the decrease in underground water when they dig 10 meters when they used to be 5 mean? And in responding, how do we start addressing this? I'm going to ask my colleague, Dr. Jackson, who has been working a lot within the agriculture sector, within the environment sector, to give us a bit of reflection about Burkina Faso and some of the projects. But then I will go ahead and ask him one question. It's a secret question. It's a trick question, which he will try and respond to. But meanwhile, as he presents, What are some of the questions? What are some of the comments that you have? Do you have examples to show? So we'll try and take those at the end of Dr. Songa's presentation. But for now, welcome to the
Merci beaucoup, Chris, pour l'opportunité que vous nous donnez de poursuivre les échanges sur la situation du Burkina. Monsieur Nana vous a déjà parlé des contextes politiques qui existent, des contextes de gestion qui existent. Le Burkina a mis en place des politiques et le Burkina dispose de pratiques très anciennes sur la gestion de la sécheresse. Et la question qu'on peut se poser, mais de quoi part-on aujourd'hui de solutions fondées sur la nature, alors que nous avons des pratiques anciennes que nous reprenons comme solutions fondées sur la nature? Quelle est la différence entre un ZAI de 1999 et un ZAI de 2022? Parce que ce ZAI de 1999, c'est le même ZAI aujourd'hui. Et pourquoi on le prend comme une solution fondée sur la nature? Donc l'expérience que nous sommes en train de mener au Burkina sur l'affinement des technologies, comme disait Christ, ce n'est pas de réinventer la roue, mais c'est de faire en sorte que nous rentrons dans les technologies de restauration des terres par ce que j'appelle la porte et non par les fenêtres. La porte, quand vous rentrez dans une maison, vous avez accès à tous les contours de la maison. Par contre, quand vous regardez par la fenêtre, vous avez une partie de vue de la maison. En d'autres termes, c'est quoi? La solution fondée sur la nature, au niveau du IUCN, nous considérons que c'est une solution, une technologie qui doit répondre à 8 critères essentiels. Et donc, si nous parlons de ZAI au Burkina, nous devons vérifier que le ZAI répond à ces 8 critères. Le premier critère, c'est que le ZAI doit répondre à un défi de la société. Le défi de la société, c'est certainement l'alimentation, c'est le défi le plus courant, c'est le développement économique, c'est l'adaptation au changement climatique, c'est la réduction des émissions de gaz aux effets de serre, c'est plusieurs effets dont la société a besoin pour vivre. Donc, les ZAI, si on doit considérer que les ZAI c'est une solution fondée sur la nature, il faut qu'ils répondent aux défis de la société dans laquelle on va l'implémenter. Deuxième élément, il faut qu'il puisse être à l'échelle. On ne peut plus continuer à mettre des ZAI dans les petits champs, il faut que ce soit sur un paysage. Si on pense que c'est une solution fondée sur la nature. Parce que la solution fondée sur la nature, c'est des solutions qui sont bâties sur un paysage et non pas localisées. Parce que ce qui va se passer dans les champs qui a été mis en ZAI va avoir des influences sur le reste du paysage voisin. Troisième critère important pour que les ZAI soient considérés comme une solution fondée sur la nature, c'est qu'il faut que l'application du ZAI débouche sur un gain net positif sur la biodiversité. La biodiversité faunique et floristique. Parce que quand on utilise la solution fondée sur la nature, ce n'est pas seulement pour lutter contre la sécheresse, c'est aussi pour lutter contre les inondations. Et il faut qu'on ait un gain net. Et je discutais pendant ce séjour avec des collègues. Si vous utilisez uniquement des semences tolérantes à la sécheresse, mais qu'est-ce qui va advenir quand il y aura une inondation dans la zone? Donc on doit avoir une diversité de solutions, d'espèces, une diversité biologique qu'on met en place pour que cette solution soit qualifiée de solution fondée sur la nature. Et dans ce troisième critère, en plus du gain net de biodiversité positif, bien entendu, gain net positif, il nous faudra assurer l'intégrité de l'écosystème, d'où la mise à échelle des designs. Le quatrième critère sur lequel les solutions fondées sur la nature se justifient, c'est que ces solutions doivent être viables économiquement. arrêter de travailler sur des solutions si la viabilité économique n'est pas assurée, parce que ça fait partie de ce qui est recherché dans le développement économique. Cinquième critère sur lequel nous allons travailler, et nous travaillons au Burkina, c'est de vérifier que toutes ces technologies sont soumises à une gouvernance inclusive. Pour les Burkinabés qui sont là, ils savent que certaines technologies ne sont pas mises en place par certains producteurs parce qu'ils ne sont pas décideurs de la terre qu'ils exploitent. Ils ne décident pas sur la terre dont ils exploitent. Et donc, il faut qu'on ait un processus de décision inclusif qui permet et aux propriétaires terriens et aux emprunteurs de terrain de pouvoir mettre en place la technologie. Donc, un processus de décision qui inclut aussi bien les propriétaires que les emprunteurs ou les acquéreurs de ces éléments. Sixième critère important pour une solution fondée sur la nature, c'est l'équité. Dans le compromis, parce qu'on ne peut pas appliquer des solutions fondées sur la nature sans compromis. Dans la société, il y a forcément quelqu'un qui va perdre quelque chose parce qu'il a accepté de le perdre. Mais comment on rend cet compromis équitable? Et ça, c'est essentiel pour les solutions fondées sur la nature. Septième, avant-dernier critère que nous vérifions, c'est de s'assurer qu'on peut gérer de manière adaptative, parce que jusqu'à présent, les projets les solutions fondées sur la nature sont mises en œuvre à travers des financements extérieurs, et donc on doit s'assurer qu'on a la possibilité de gérer de manière adaptative ces financements, sinon ça ne va pas marcher. C'est que lorsque nous avons signé le contrat avec un bailleur et que le bailleur ne nous permet pas d'adapter à l'évolution du système de mise en place des solutions fondées sur la nature, on va aboutir à un échec, parce qu'en mettant en œuvre les 6 critères que je vous ai évoqués plus tôt, vous vous rendrez compte qu'à un certain moment, on a besoin de s'adapter. Si on n'avait pas inclus quelqu'un dans la gouvernance et qu'on doit l'inclure, au fil du temps, il faut bien qu'il y ait la possibilité d'adapter la gestion de ces projets. En attendant que nos projets aient des financements internes, donc gérés par nous-mêmes, ces financements financés par nous-mêmes, lorsqu'on a des financements externes, je pense que les donateurs externes doivent savoir qu'on ne peut plus gérer les projets comme on les gérait avant si on veut appliquer des solutions fondées sur la nature. Et le dernier critère pour lequel les solutions fondées sur la nature peuvent être utiles, c'est la durabilité dans la solution. Il doit être durable. Il doit être durable et il doit être intégré à la juridiction de la zone d'intervention. C'est-à-dire ce qui est mis en œuvre au Sahel, Burkina, de la manière dont il a été mis en œuvre, il ne pourra pas être mis en œuvre au sud-ouest du Burkina, parce que nous sommes dans des contextes juridictionnels qui ont des particularités. Et donc il faudra que la même solution peut être mise en œuvre dans plusieurs endroits, mais il faudra qu'il s'intègre au contexte juridictionnel local. Je crois que c'est les éléments sur lesquels je voudrais insister en matière de solutions fondées sur la nature, et ce sont ces éléments sur lesquels nous sommes en train d'expérimenter au Burkina Faso à travers le financement que nous avons de la coopération autrichienne. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, Jack. I think that was quite a presentation, taking us through the criteria, what they mean. He has actually preempted my question. he's a clever little guy. He's been able to react. I was going to ask him the same question about the demi-lunes and the application in Burkina Faso. Why are we now talking about demi-lunes in NPS? And this is the one realization. Demi-lunes, nature-based approaches like ecosystem-based adaptation, they do exist. We are already putting in place a lot of these solutions. Nature-based solutions only crowds it and gives it a holistic approach where we can go step by step and ensure that we can have biodiversity engaged within there, we can have social and economic development. I would like to ask now from the floor, and I will take maybe 3 questions at a time and see if we have time for any more. If you have a question, a comment, and this is to any of our presenters who have been there today, just have a comment to add to this, I would welcome you to just raise your hand. You will identify yourself or which organization you're working with, and then ask this question. If it's directed to someone specific, just point that out. So, first opportunity, yes. So, gentleman there, someone else, 2, 1 more. There is. Okay, we'll start with 2 for now.
So good morning, everybody. I'm Seven from Tanzania. I don't have a real question, but I'm sure you guys are. Good morning again. I'm Seven from Tanzania. I said I don't have a real question, but I'm sure you guys are presenting just an extract of the data set that you may have. And I'm just wondering if you are willing to share with us some of these materials so that we get time to look deeper. Thank you so much.
Merci. Je suis Alexis Sonkoudou du Burkina Faso, de l'ONG Trade West Africa. J'ai beaucoup apprécié en fait cette présentation et ce partage du docteur Songa sur les solutions fondées sur la nature. C'est comme si on reprenait de façon en tout cas simple l'adage qui dit fille de naturel et reviendra au galop. Parce qu'en réalité, c'est véritablement ce qui nous manquait. À chaque fois, on travaille à pouvoir trouver des solutions en dehors de ce que la nature elle-même nous offre. Or que ces solutions-là doivent être apportées à la nature pour que nous puissions toujours continuer à bénéficier de ces bienfaits en la gardant aussi de façon durable pour les autres générations. Les différents critères, en l'occurrence les 7 qui ont été cités et qui doivent en fait être le socle en fait de cette solution fondée sur la nature, et de toute façon en adéquation avec les différentes réalités. Et le point en tout cas pour ma part qu'il faut davantage aussi intégrer sur cette question, c'est véritablement en fait la prise en compte des compétences endogènes. Parce qu'en réalité, c'est les communautés qui sont en tout cas auprès de ces différentes ressources et qui vivent et qui dépendent de cette nature-là, qui sont en tout cas les mieux placés pour pouvoir aussi apporter leur contribution, pour apporter aussi des solutions qu'on peut davantage affiner avec d'autres contributions. Je pense que c'est de cette manière, en tout cas, qu'on va pouvoir aussi, en tout cas, travailler à ce que cette solution fondée sur la nature aussi puisse être, en tout cas, efficace sur le terrain et dans la durabilité. Merci.
Bonjour, moi c'est Rob Palatri, toujours du Burkina, au niveau de la coordination de la Grande Brève du Burkina. Je voulais tout juste voir avec l'IUCN, avec les différents travaux qui ont été réalisés. Est-ce que par rapport aux solutions fondées sur la nature, est-ce qu'il y a des études prospectives pour voir d'ici 2050 le ZAC qui est réalisé, est-ce qu'il serait toujours efficace dans 20, 50 ans? Est-ce qu'il y a des modèles qui sont en train d'être conçus pour nous orienter vraiment en tant que capteurs de mise à l'échelle de ces différentes méthodes et technologies? Donc s'il y a des études dans ce sens, nous voulons avoir une idée, ça peut nous aider. Merci.
Okay, I will ask Jacques, then we'll come back to you. So Jacques,
merci beaucoup. Je pense que nous sommes dans la phase des études prospectives pour réaffiner les technologies qui existent et voir quelles sont les technologies qu'on peut utiliser comme solution fondée sur la nature. C'est pour ça que dans ma présentation, j'ai pris l'exemple d'Israël. Donc on va passer en revue toutes ces technologies pour voir s'ils tiennent les 8 critères et si ils tiennent les 8 critères, est-ce que d'ici 5, 10, 20, 30 ans, ils peuvent toujours servir. Voilà, donc on est dans la démarche. C'est vrai qu'on a pris un peu de retard, mais normalement, tous les acteurs burkinabés qui sont ici doivent être impliqués dans ce processus d'analyse prospective des technologies que nous connaissons déjà.
Okay, and maybe one more question they asked. In terms of indigenous people, are they included within the framework?
Yeah, of course, bien sûr. Bien sûr, les populations locales sont au cœur de la définition ou de l'identification de la solution fondée sur la nature. Parce que nous avons dit le premier critère, il faut qu'il répondent à des défis sociétaux. Qui dit défi sociétal dit communauté, parce que les défis d'une communauté A n'est pas la même chose que les défis d'une communauté B. Donc forcément, on ne va pas rester de manière générique pour prendre les défis sociétaux rassemblés au niveau du Burkina comme un pays. Donc ce sera par région, ce sera par localité, ce sera par communauté qu'on va extraire ces défis sociétaux et développer ensemble le dispositif de solutions fondées sur la nature. Donc la connaissance des communautés sur les défis est partie intégrante du processus d'analyse. La connaissance des communautés sur les gouvernances, c'est-à-dire le mot de gouvernance locale, indigène ou traditionnelle, font partie des critères que nous sommes en train de travailler. Donc, les connaissances locales font partie des solutions fondées sur la nature. Pas seulement les connaissances des scientifiques qui vont faire devenir la solution. Et d'ailleurs, au Burkina, vous savez que les arts et autres, ce sont des connaissances, c'est des technologies indigènes, locales, qui ont été améliorées par la recherche. Mais c'est les paysans eux-mêmes qui ont créé les arts. Il y a beaucoup d'autres technologies que les producteurs burkinabés ont innové et que la recherche a aidé à affiner. Donc, les connaissances locales font partie de l'approche NPS, solution fondée sur la nature.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And for the gentleman who was asking about, is there more information about nature-based solutions? Please feel free to interact with us. We'll be here for a short while afterwards, and we can provide some primary information to it.
Merci beaucoup. En fait, ma question ne s'adresse pas au Dr Jacques, mais elle a été suscitée par sa présentation et ça s'adresse à sa voisine de droite. Parce qu'elle a bien fait vraiment la typologie des sécheresses météorologiques, hydrologiques, édaphiques et socio-économiques. Et sur le plan vraiment de la durabilité et de ce que nous avons comme vraiment solution basée sur la nature, il y a ce phénomène de jardin polyvalent, de jardin nutritif que nous développons comme une alternative vraiment viable quand on sait que les sécheresses sont récurrentes et qui à l'heure actuelle là vraiment produit vraiment des résultats très bien. Mais le problème, c'est la renouvelabilité de la ressource de l'eau souterraine. Est-ce qu'il y a à l'heure actuelle là des technologies vraiment éprouvées pour s'assurer que vraiment en déployant ça à grande échelle, et on est sûr que la ressource que l'on puise là est vraiment renouvelable pour que cette technologie là, on soit sûr quand même que la mise en échelle là ne va pas poser vraiment des problèmes écologiques à la mort. Merci.
Okay, thank you very much. What are the sectors for NPS? I don't know if
let me put it in a simple way. The question was that he was happy with the typology of drought that you presented, but in Burkina we are deploying a technology that we call nutritive gardening system that's tapped in the groundwater. And his question is whether the renewability of the groundwater is ensured for scaling up this kind of technology that are using groundwater. Because you talked about the different type of technology, hydrology, drought, all this type of drought you talked about. What is the potential of groundwater to be used to scale out or output technology that we consider a nature-based solution?
If I understand correctly, the question is about sustainability of the interventions. In general, without implementing the actual NBACs, you would not know the impact for sure, but what we normally do is a modeling system. So you would have the field data at smaller scale, and then you implement and upscale this in a modeling system. Oftentimes, if the groundwater is a concern, you would implement in the water resource model that incorporates groundwater, and then you assess if this happens at a large scale, what will happen. So this is the type of scenario analysis that we typically do and try to assess the impact, and also look at the nexus issues in terms of water resource with impact on the, for example, aquatic biodiversity or the non-biodiversity. Yeah, and I think that's.
Thank you, Tim. I may take one more question if there is a person or one more comment. Oh, two. Okay, so those were the last ones.
Ok, merci bien. Moi, c'est Samuel Minata. Je suis du ministère en charge de l'environnement au Burkina Faso. Et je... Ok. Ok. Donc, je disais que moi, c'est Samuel Minata. Je suis du ministère en charge de l'environnement au Burkina Faso. J'ai vraiment suivi la présentation du Dr Jacques avec intérêt, et ce qui m'amène à poser la question à savoir quels seront les critères de rétention d'une solution. Par exemple, quand je prends les ailes, est-ce que si ça ne répond pas à une des critères, est-ce qu'elle sera considérée comme une solution basée sur la nature? Merci beaucoup.
Donc, bonjour, moi c'est Simon Garwa, je suis du Niger, je travaille au ministère de l'Environnement et de la lutte contre la désertification. Donc en tout cas, nous remercions beaucoup les présentateurs, surtout Dr Jacques qui a présenté en tout cas les critères par rapport à la validité en tout cas d'une solution. Bon, ma question c'est par rapport au processus en tout cas qui a permis en tout cas d'identifier et de retenir ces critères. Si le docteur peut nous revenir là-dessus, voilà. Je pense que c'est ma question. Merci beaucoup.
Merci l'autre caméra, pardon.
Okay, Jack, back to you again.
La première question concernant les critères qui permettent de décider si une pratique ou une technologie est une solution fondée sur la nature. Évidemment, dans le dispositif que l'IUCN a élaboré, nous avons des critères, nous avons 8 critères, nous avons 28 indicateurs pour vérifier si la solution est fondée sur la nature. Donc en d'autres termes, le critère peut ne pas être totalement validé, mais il peut être partiellement validé à cause du fait que la technologie satisfait aux indicateurs du critère. Donc, majoritairement, la majeure partie des indicateurs sont satisfaits. Même si d'autres parties des indicateurs du même critère ne sont pas satisfaits, on peut valider le critère. Donc, le critère n'a pas besoin forcément d'être complètement validé pour pouvoir passer le ciblage, le criblage de solutions fondées sur la nature. Deuxième chose que je voulais dire, c'est que bon, ce n'est pas toutes les solutions, c'est pas partout qu'on va mettre des solutions fondées sur la nature. Parce qu'il peut y avoir des contextes où c'est impossible de mettre des solutions fondées sur la nature. En ce moment, on va mettre d'autres types de solutions, comme ce qu'on appelle les solutions grises, en attendant d'avoir les possibilités de mettre en place des solutions fondées sur la nature qui répondent aux 8 critères et 28 indicateurs au total. Alors, le choix de ces critères et indicateurs dans le processus de développement de ces guides au niveau de l'IUCN a pris au moins 10 ans. Donc c'est un processus de 10 ans de consultation, de concertation avec des acteurs à l'intérieur du secrétariat de l'IUCN comme auprès des membres et des membres de commission. Comme vous le savez, l'IUCN comprend 3 piliers. Le secrétariat qui est le personnel, les membres statutaires qui sont des gouvernements ou des acteurs de la société civile, et nous avons 6 commissions qui sont des experts, des scientifiques qui travaillent dans les universités, dans les centres de recherche et qui produisent des informations en collaboration avec les 2 autres piliers pour nous permettre d'avoir un document solide. Et donc c'est après une dizaine d'années que ces 8 critères et 28 indicateurs ont été validés à Marseille en 2021, au dernier congrès sur la nature qui a eu lieu à Marseille 2021, pour nous dire qu'on peut maintenant travailler à la diffusion de cette pratique. Donc il y a une longue histoire, et pour ceux qui sont au Burkina, ils auront l'opportunité, parce qu'on prévoit une formation dans le cadre de ce projet, pour passer en revue cet outil de ces 8 critères et de ces 28 indicateurs, pour qu'on voit ensemble comment on peut faire l'utilisation. Mais encore une fois, ce n'est pas dans tous les contextes qu'on va appliquer des solutions fondées sur la nature. Il peut y avoir des contextes où ce n'est même pas possible. Et si ce n'est pas possible, ce n'est pas mauvais. On commence par les solutions grises, le temps que la nature puisse nous permettre de le remettre en place. Et j'ai apprécié bien l'intervention du collègue du Burkina. Mais si vous donnez à la nature 1 franc, il vous donne 1 million. Ça, moi, c'est clair. Mais il faut qu'on ait le courage de donner ce franc à la nature. Nous avons des preuves très palpables. Et nous avons le monsieur qui a arrêté le désert au Burkina. Je pense que beaucoup de gens ont vu son film. Et si vous allez voir la forêt qu'il a reconstituée, mais il est dû passer par plusieurs types de solutions. Des solutions non basées sur la nature. Et aujourd'hui, il est dans la solution fondée sur la nature. Les Burkinabés qui sont là peuvent donner plus de détails parce que le ministère de l'Environnement prend au sérieux ce terrain, je pense. La dernière fois, vous êtes allé l'aider à clôturer, etc. Donc, la solution la nature peut nous aider à résoudre beaucoup de choses. Voilà ce que je voulais dire.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to bring this to a close. I think we've had quite a fruitful discussion. Thank you so much for being here. We've had examples from many parts of the world. We've had Sudan, we've had Kenya. Thank you so much for attending. Georgia, Burkina Faso, thank you much for gracing us with your presence. But I think the key takeaway messages is we need to find an ecosystem-based solution to how to invest. So thank you so much. At the back there will be drinks out. Just before we finish, as part of the programs that IUCN is running, we have our impact program on drylands, which I will ask my colleague Alexander to take just 2 minutes to tell me what that's about, because it's really interesting.
Thank you, Chris. Well, even less than 2 minutes, 2 sentences. That's right. We've executed the dryland ID coordination project that is covering the western, eastern parts of Africa and also southern Africa, and extends to Central Asia. It coordinates 11 countries in the child project. And of course, it's transformative management of the drylands and grasslands, of course. But for more information, please feel free to come to us.
Okay, thank you very much. We have some drinks and refreshments out at the back. Feel free, and we will also be here for your evening.
Arrête l'enregistrement, arrête l'enregistrement.